For decades, Jack Lemmon was a comedy king, but his private reality was far grittier than fans ever suspected. While the public adored his charming and relatable persona, he privately wrestled with internal demons that he desperately tried to mask from the world for many years. Everything changed in 1974 when his secrets spilled out during a major awards gala in an undeniable way. What exactly was Lemmon masking, and how did a beloved star end up burdened by a shadow that few noticed? Let's dive in, because Lemmon's origin story sounds like total fiction, beginning with his mother Millie. While deep into a bridge game, she ignored the sudden pains, too focused on her hand to realize she was in labor. Since the delivery was 2 months early, the situation seemed entirely surreal until a sudden medical crisis forced a frantic sprint to the Newton Wellesley Medical Center. Time ran out very quickly, and on February 8, 1925, Millie welcomed Jack Lemmon inside a cramped elevator before she could ever reach the delivery ward. Arriving 2 months ahead of schedule while appearing quite jaundiced, a nurse reportedly teased the infant by calling him a yellow lemon, which served as a truly bizarre introduction for a future Hollywood comedic legend. While scraping by with early radio and television gigs, he fell hard for a fellow actress named Cynthia Stone. The pair wed in Peoria, Illinois in 1950, but an unsettling vibe overshadowed what should have been a blissful day. His father attended, but his mother was notably absent for a reason that was far more tragic than guests understood. Millie was secretly struggling with a drinking habit and once left a gas stove burning while in a drunken stupor. The folks next door caught the scent of gas just in time, dodging a fatal disaster, though the hospitalization put a serious damper on Lemmon's wedding. Soon after, Jack hit a major career wall. His premiere shot at Broadway stardom in room service tanked instantly, closing up shop after only 2 weeks. It was a bitter pill, but that wreck actually led to a bigger stage. A talent hunter in the seats noticed his spark and set up a meeting with Harry Cohn at Columbia. Cohn was impressed, yet he simply couldn't get past the name Lemmon. Cohn feared critics would have a field day mocking a lemon if the actor flopped, so he demanded the name Lennon. Jack Lemmon stood his ground on his original moniker, signaling an initial, quiet rebellion against the industry machine, determined to overhaul his image. Few dared to cross Harry Cohn, a powerhouse who demanded total compliance. When Lemmon stood his ground, it left the mogul absolutely floored. Cohn lobbied for Lennon, fearing a flop by a guy named Lemmon would hand every snarky reviewer an easy punchline. Remarkably, despite having zero industry leverage back then, the newcomer refused to back down. Jack settled the debate with a sharp move, warning that Lennon sounded far too much like the communist leader. This strategic hint of a public relations nightmare silenced the mogul. That logic worked, and Cohn backed off, letting Jack keep the name that would eventually become a household staple. His debut in 1954's It Should Happen to You followed quickly, though the initial experience was quite rocky. George Cukor felt Jack was being way too theatrical for the lens. Sensing the actor was playing to the back row, the director offered a bit of insight that would redefine Lemmon's entire career. Stripping it back was the magic touch. Jack later admitted that this realization changed the game for him. After the film struck gold, he stepped into a high-stakes showdown with Harry Cohn over a new contract. Incredibly, the newcomer came out on top. He inked a 7-year deal with Columbia, but secured a legendary concession for that era, the freedom to take on outside projects whenever he pleased. That kind of deal was legendary in the 1950s, but rising stardom also brought some incredibly awkward encounters. Shortly after joining the roster, Jack was hanging out at the studio when some guys started scouting him for a gig. Lemmon went along with the conversation, having absolutely no clue he was talking to a total big shot. He remained oblivious to John Ford's presence until a witness clued him in afterward. While the sudden realization probably stung, that awkward first impression didn't actually sabotage his chances. Ford hired him for 1955's Mr. Roberts, a massive project featuring icons like Henry Fonda and James Cagney. This was his career-defining break, yet the filming environment felt like a total powder keg. Between the clashing titans and massive egos, Lemmon essentially acted as the mediator to prevent the production from falling apart. Against the odds, he and James Cagney really clicked, despite their totally unconventional introduction. For a good while, Jack Lemmon had been pulling a fast one with this peculiar little secret. Back in his small-screen days, he impulsively opted to play a righty using his left hand, purely to test the audience's attention to detail. Nobody ever noticed until he set foot on the Mr. Roberts set, where James Cagney called him out instantly. Cagney just looked at him and asked if he was still tricking people into thinking he was a southpaw. Jack felt like he'd finally made it when his talent was spotted, but having Cagney do the honors was the real prize. This meeting killed the tension, turning them into fast friends almost immediately. Sadly, that friendship was a rare highlight in what quickly devolved into a chaotic and messy production. Tensions between Cagney, Fonda, and Ford reached a breaking point, culminating in the director actually punching Fonda. Life on that movie production became so hostile that his physical decline, coupled with the terrible energy, led to his total removal. For Jack Lemmon, this gig was intended to be the massive breakout that revolutionized his future. He watched as his major opportunity threatened to crumble, but the insanity was only beginning. Mervyn LeRoy jumped into the director's chair following Ford's departure, attempting to steady the ship while sticking to the initial vision. Then a third director, Joshua Logan, joined the fray since he had helmed the original stage version with Fonda. Under Fonda's thumb, Logan allegedly refilmed huge chunks of the movie, causing the budget and schedule to spiral out of control. When the film debuted, Jack's professional future remained a total coin toss. Despite the behind-the-scenes drama, Mr. Roberts killed it at the box office. Surprisingly, the industry veterans were snubbed, yet Lemmon walked away with the gold for his supporting role. That trophy turned his world upside down. After years of grinding through chaos and false starts, he'd finally arrived. He didn't waste a second of it. His schedule exploded after that, eventually leading him to team up with the legendary filmmaker Billy Wilder. Wilder once approached him with a wild concept involving two guys dressing in drag to hide from gangsters. The premise seemed totally nuts, but it would later transform into the classic Some Like It Hot. Since it was the legendary Billy Wilder making the pitch, Jack Lemmon simply couldn't refuse. Initially, Jack Lemmon wasn't even the top pick to play the character of Daphne. Wilder had actually set his sights on Jerry Lewis for the part. However, he even made a running gag out of it, mailing Lewis a box of candy every single year just to show his gratitude for that rejection. Still, there were other factors that nearly cost him the job. Despite Tony Curtis already being on board, executives remained skeptical that Lemmon possessed the star power needed to anchor a major production. The producers were holding out for a bigger name, particularly because the lead actress hadn't signed on yet. The tide finally turned the moment Marilyn Monroe committed to the film. With her fame backing the movie, Wilder finally had the clout to gamble on Lemmon. As soon as production started, everyone realized he was the perfect fit. Between the two stars, Tony Curtis was definitely the one more weirded out by the feminine wardrobe. Lemmon, on the other hand, dove headfirst into the transformation. Curtis later mentioned how giddy his co-star looked, literally radiating joy the second he stepped out in his wig and gown. That sense of total abandon is exactly what made his acting so iconic, though there was a deeper layer to it as well. Following the premiere, his relatives pointed out that his portrayal of Daphne bore a striking resemblance to his own mum. He had unknowingly tapped into a very personal source of inspiration, but he also approached the role with a highly tactical mindset. To test if their disguises were actually believable, he convinced Curtis to stroll through the studio lot in full drag. When they went unnoticed, he decided to up the ante by suggesting they walk right into the ladies' room. Nobody even blinked an eye, which was a bold move that proved their performance was totally convincing. However, mastering those high heels was a completely different story. The production actually hired a professional dancer to train the guys on how to move gracefully in pumps. Lemmon stuck with it for about 7 days before realizing the whole process was pointless. Since his character was supposed to be a guy struggling in heels anyway, he figured being clumsy was more authentic. He ditched the rehearsals and went with his gut, adding a layer of messy realism to Daphne. Marilyn Monroe's chaotic energy during filming became the stuff of Hollywood legend. Between her constant tardiness and forgetting her dialogue, she notoriously required dozens of attempts just to deliver the simple line, "It is me, sugar." While Curtis was visibly annoyed by the delays, Lemmon took a much softer approach. He remained incredibly supportive, later explaining that Monroe was just doing whatever was necessary to get herself mentally ready for the lens. Regardless of the backstage drama, the movie turned into a massive hit that everyone loved. It catapulted Lemmon into the stratosphere of fame, but that level of stardom brought its own set of complications. At that point, he was firmly pigeonholed as a funny man, and he started panicking that the industry would never take him seriously as a dramatic lead. Eager to shake things up, he rolled the dice by taking a role in the 1962 drama Days of Wine and Roses. Early on, people thought he was making a huge mistake. The plot centered on a marriage ruined by severe drinking, and people at the initial screenings were so jarred by Lemmon's dark performance that they literally fled the theatre. Little did the public realize just how much of himself he had poured into that grueling character. Seeking a raw portrayal of substance abuse, Lemmon visited detox units at a prison to witness firsthand the agony of men going through the DTs. Those haunting images really shook him up and stuck in his mind for months. He carried all that heavy emotion right onto the filming set. During a sequence where his character is strapped down in a mental ward while detoxing, Lemmon's intensity was so overwhelming that the crew found it genuinely terrifying. He got so caught up in the madness of the scene that the staff actually had to intervene to snap him out of it. This proved that behind his witty exterior lay a profound capacity for darkness, and ultimately, that career pivot was a massive win. The film was a critical darling, landing Oscar nods for both Lemmon and his co-star Lee Remick. This silenced any critics who thought he was just a one-trick pony in comedies. He demonstrated a real knack for heavy drama, which launched a whole new phase of his career. However, as his professional stock soared, his personal affairs began to crumble. Despite having a young son, his union with Cynthia Stone eventually hit a breaking point and fell apart. By 1962, he tied the knot with actress Felicia Farr, and they welcomed a baby girl into the world a few years later. Even with his fame growing, the pressure at home was starting to mount. Following the death of his father in 1962, his mother Millie became increasingly vulnerable and needy. He spent years doing his absolute best to care for her, but a 1967 incident left a permanent scar on his soul. He had set up a family outing involving his mum, his spouse, and their little girl. After getting no response at her front door, a panicked Lemmon eventually decided to break into the apartment. The scene inside was absolutely heartbreaking. His mother had passed away while fully dressed for their trip, as if she was simply waiting for him to arrive. Medical professionals attributed her death to heart failure. Now orphaned, Lemmon buried himself in his acting roles, likely using his craft as a shield against the grief. Coming into the 1970s with a string of hits, he became obsessed with bringing a passion project called Save the Tiger to life. He spent 2 years lobbying Paramount until they finally relented, though they insisted the entire production cost less than $1 million. His conviction was so absolute that he basically worked for peanuts just to get the cameras rolling. Initially, however, it seemed like he had backed a total loser. Ticket sales were dismal, as the general public largely ignored the movie, yet Lemmon's individual contribution was undeniable. Reviewers raved about his acting even when they hated the script, and he ultimately walked away with the Best Actor Oscar. This victory solidified his reputation as a serious thespian with immense range, not just a guy who told jokes. Away from the movie sets, Lemmon had a completely different obsession. He was a total golf nut, participating in the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am annually with a singular goal of making the cut for the final round. Though he never reached that milestone, his charm on the course was so infectious that they eventually created an award in his honor for standout amateur players. Lemmon was a natural-born performer from the start, entertaining his parents' friends at the age of 7 with a bizarre routine featuring 25 distinct types of snores. The guests were in stitches, but like everything else in his complex life, that comedy masked a far more profound artistic sensibility. His childhood bit was far more than just a silly prank. Even at age 7, he used humor as a shield against the growing tension he felt between his parents. Noticing they slept in separate rooms was his first real clue that things were wrong. His mother brushed it off by blaming his father's snoring, but the kid wasn't buying it. Instead of arguing, he decided to channel all that awkward energy into comedy. The truth was much deeper than just separate sleeping arrangements. In reality, his parents were living 2 completely different lives under the same roof. While his father was constantly away on business trips, his mother spent the bulk of her time living at the Ritz-Carlton. They were careful not to scream at each other when he was around, but he was smart enough to see the marriage was failing. Like many kids, he mistakenly thought his own behavior could fix their relationship. He felt that if he could just keep everyone laughing, the family might stay together. That is a massive emotional weight for a child to carry, but he shouldered it anyway. They didn't officially split until he was 18, though his father had hoped for a different outcome. Having spent his entire career in the bakery world, the old man really wanted his son to take over the family trade. When he announced his dream of becoming an actor, his father didn't get angry. He simply handed him $300 and told him to go for it. That small vote of confidence stayed with him forever as he headed off toward a very uncertain future. Decades later, his raw performance as an alcoholic in Days of Wine and Roses mirrored a very real battle he was starting to face. At a 1974 event for James Cagney, he looked clearly out of it and could barely get through his speech. He tried to blame it on a bad mix of drinks and medication, but the excuse didn't stick. The underlying problem was only getting worse. A 1976 drunk driving arrest made the situation impossible to ignore. Even so, his work on the big screen remained absolutely brilliant. He picked up Oscar nods for The China Syndrome in 1979 and Missing in 1982. In the eyes of his peers, he was still a legend. However, a comedic reunion with Walter Matthau and Billy Wilder in 1981 didn't go as planned. Buddy Buddy turned out to be a massive flop. The critics absolutely shredded the movie, which was a tough pill to swallow for a guy used to winning. But he wasn't about to let one failure stop him. He kept grinding through the rough patches, determined to make sure his story ended on a high note. Following a few more box office duds, he made the move to television and found a whole new level of success. In 1997, he starred in the remake of 12 Angry Men as the juror who refuses to give up on the truth. The audience was blown away, and the role earned him a Golden Globe nomination for Best Actor in a TV movie. Shockwaves hit the auditorium when the frontrunner was snubbed for the evening's top prize. It was Ving Rhames who walked away with the win for Don King, Only in America. But once Rhames hit the mic, he stunned the elite crowd by calling Lemmon out. Moved by the moment, he literally handed his trophy over to the Hollywood veteran. Everyone in the building gave him a standing ovation, turning that loss into one of the most powerful moments of his career. He passed away at 76 years old on June 27, 2001. Before he went, he finally did something he'd avoided for a lifetime. He went public with his struggle against alcoholism, finally admitting to the battle he'd been fighting behind closed doors. Tucked away in California at the Westwood Village Memorial Park, you will find the legendary Jack Lemmon. Even his headstone feels like a movie opening, which simply reads, Jack Lemmon in. This intimate gathering drew a massive crowd of Hollywood icons who truly cared for him, like Billy Wilder, Shirley MacLaine, and Kevin Spacey. Other legends, including Gregory Peck, Sidney Poitier, the Douglas family, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Barbara Sinatra, and Charlie Matthau, all came to pay their respects. The outpouring of love that day really proved how much the industry admired him. Critic Stanley Kaufman called him the most skilled American performer of that entire era. Kevin Spacey added that Jack was absolutely incomparable in the world of show business. He was known for being a genuinely decent guy who never let his massive fame go to his head. Billy Wilder, who knew his abilities better than anyone, mentioned that he loved him dearly and considered him the finest talent he ever directed. That concludes our look at this legend, and we appreciate you watching. If you found this interesting, please subscribe to our channel and ring that bell icon to get an alert for our next release. We will see you in the next